So you finally got a real job. Stephanie's voice cut through the restaurant's murmur before I'd even sat down. No congratulations, no enthusiasm, just that tone she reserved for talking about things that shouldn't have happened. Grant pulled my chair out for me, whispering, "Just ignore her." But we both knew that ignoring Stephanie was like ignoring a hurricane. I settled into my seat at Bella Vista. The kind of upscale restaurant where Stephanie felt most comfortable, expensive enough to remind everyone of her status, intimate enough that her cutting remarks hit home with precision. The white tablecloth was pristine. The crystal stems caught the dim light perfectly, and I already felt underdressed despite wearing my best blazer. "Regional director," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That is indeed a significant promotion. I'll be overseeing the entire West Coast division." Before we continue, I want to thank you all for being here as we explore stories about deserved success and respect in the workplace. If you think merit should matter more than connections, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women facing similar challenges. Now let's see how this plays out. Jaylee looked up from her menu with that rehearsed smile she put on when she was about to say something cruel. "How wonderful of you, dear. Although I have to ask, what happened to the person who had the position before? Did they retire? Was they transferred?" The question hung in the air, heavy with innuendo. I knew what she was really asking. What quota did they need to fill to choose you? The position was created specifically for our expansion, I explained, hating how defensive I sounded. Our division has grown by 30% in the last 18 months, and they needed someone to handle the increased workload. 30%, Stephanie repeated as if checking the numbers. That's impressive. Of course, growth is easier when you're starting from scratch, isn't it? Grant's hand found mine under the table, a gentle squeeze that was supposed to be reassuring, but his silence spoke louder than his touch. 3 years, dozens of familiars, 3 years of comments like this, and I'd never once told them to stop. The waiter appeared with wine glasses, and Stephanie ordered a bottle without consulting the table. "The Sadamuft," she said, pronouncing it with that kind of perfect accent that reminded everyone she'd studied abroad in college. "I think we need something special for this occasion." I'd been preparing for this dinner all week. I'd practiced how I'd tell them about the promotion, imagining their shocked faces when they realized the temporary girlfriend had accomplished something significant. I'd even bought myself a new blouse, navy blue, professional but not intimidating. Now it looked like costume jewelry at a diamond show. "You know," Jay said, unfolding her napkin with deliberate care, "I was just talking to my book club about how different the workplace is now. So many opportunities for people who might not have had them before. It's really quite progressive." The words hit the mark perfectly. People who perhaps wouldn't have had them before. Translation: people like me, from backgrounds like mine, who went to state colleges and worked their way up through night classes while others handed everything on a silver platter. "Merit advancement has always been the standard at my company," I said, surprised by the firmness of my own voice. "They don't hand out director positions like participation trophies." Stephanie's eyebrows rose slightly, the only sign that my answer had registered. "Of course not, dear. I'm sure you worked very hard. Although I do wonder about the competition these days. The standard seems so flexible compared to when my generation was building their careers." Aunt Stephanie spoke up, Grant finally, though her voice lacked conviction. "That's not fair. You don't know the details of his promotion." "Oh, But I do know the company, Stephanie replied gently. Richardson Industries, isn't it? I've heard wonderful things about their diversity initiatives. Very cutting edge. Nicole Richardson speaks sometimes at our charity luncheon. A lovely woman, very committed to inclusion. The way she said inclusion made it sound like an illness. I gripped my water glass tighter, watching the condensation drip onto the white tablecloth like tiny tears. Indeed, Hallie leaned forward conspiratorially, talking about Richardson Industries. Did you hear about Dylan's promotion? Stephanie's nephew added for my benefit, as if I hadn't heard them bragging about him at every family gathering for the past 6 months. The youngest junior analyst they've hired. Straight from their MBA program to a corner office. Not a corner office, Stephanie corrected with false modesty, though her smile betrayed her pride, but impressive for someone her age. 24 and already making strategic decisions. Some people just have innate leadership qualities. Innate leadership qualities. Not hard work. Not dedication, not the kind of grueling, relentless effort it took to earn an MBA while working full-time. Just natural gifts of the kind that seemingly skipped over people like me. Dylan is so bright, Jay continued. Top of his class, internships at Fortune 500 companies. Letters of recommendation from professors who specifically requested him for research projects. It's refreshing to see someone who has actually earned his position. The implication was crystal clear. Dylan had earned his position. I'd been given mine. Grant shifted uncomfortably, but his silence was deafening. This was the moment I needed him to stand up for myself. Tell them about the late nights I spent studying while he watched television. Mention the client presentations I made that resulted in million-dollar contracts. Instead, he focused on his bread plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. Not everyone is cut out to juggle work and home responsibilities, Jolly said. Her voice taking on that honeyed tone she used when delivering her cruelest remarks. Some of us understand that a woman's true success comes from creating a harmonious home environment, making sure her husband feels supported and valued. The words fell like physical blows. Every night I spent studying, every weekend I worked instead of attending Grant's golf tournaments, every sacrifice I made to build something of my own, all of it was being reinterpreted as selfish ambition that made me a failure as a woman. A woman's true success. Stephanie added, raising her wineglass in a mock toast, is measured by how happy and fulfilled her husband looks, how well he manages his priorities. I glanced at Grant, searching his face for any sign that I disagreed with her assessment. His jaw was set, but he said nothing. 3 years of marriage, and he was still more afraid of disappointing his aunt than standing up for his wife. The restaurant suddenly felt smaller. The light was warm, too bright. The conversations at other tables were too loud. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, needing a moment to compose myself before I said something I couldn't take back. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. When I'd become someone who apologized for her accomplishments, when I'd started to believe maybe they were right. When I returned to the table, the conversation had shifted to Dylan's recent work projects. Stephanie was describing his innovative approach to client relations while Halia nodded approvingly. They spoke of him with the kind of respect and admiration I'd never heard them use about anyone else's accomplishments. That's when Nicole Richardson stood up. I'd barely noticed her during dinner. Nicole was always quiet at these meetings, content to listen while others dominated the conversation. As the wife of the CEO, she commanded automatic respect but rarely insinuated herself into family drama. She was graceful in a way that didn't need to announce itself. Understated jewelry, perfect posture, and an air of confidence that came from genuine achievement rather than inherited status. "Interesting timing for this conversation," Nicole said, her voice cutting through the chatter with surgical precision. "Especially given what just arrived on my desk this afternoon about her nephew, Dylan." The temperature at our table seemed to drop 10 degrees. Stephanie's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Jay's confident smile flickered like a candle in the wind. Nicole's eyes moved slowly across the table before settling on me. There was something in her expression, not pity, but recognition. As if she'd been watching this whole performance and had seen enough. "Dylan," she repeated, letting the name hang in the air like smoke. "Your brilliant nephew who's been working on our junior analyst program. The one you've been praising so enthusiastically." Stephanie's voice came out as barely a whisper. "What about Dylan?" Nicole's smile was sharp as glass. "Oh, I think that's a conversation better suited for a more private setting. Don't you agree?" The power shift was immediate and undeniable. Suddenly, Stephanie and Hallie seemed very small in their expensive chairs, and I felt something I hadn't experienced all evening. Anticipation. The Monday after that disastrous dinner, I walked into Richardson Industries with a different kind of focus. Nicole's cryptic comment about Dylan echoed in my mind as I settled into my cubicle, surrounded by the familiar whir of keyboards and coffee makers. My colleagues had already started their morning routines, but I found myself studying the office layout with fresh eyes. Dylan's workspace was in the corner, glass-walled and spotless. The junior analyst's corner office G had mentioned, though she'd exaggerated about the corner part. Still, for someone who'd barely been with the company for a year, it was an impressive setup. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a standing desk, dual monitors, and enough room for client meetings, the kind of workspace I'd dreamed of for my first 5 years here. Coffees freshly brewed, Marcus called from the break room. "And congratulations on the promotion, Director." The title still felt surreal. Regional Director. 6 months ago I'd managed 3 accounts and hoped for a team leader position. Now I was overseeing the entire West Coast operation. The rapid advancement had surprised everyone, including me. But sitting here now, watching Dylan arrive fashionably late in his designer suit, I wondered if my success was somehow connected to whatever Nicole knew. My computer chimed with a calendar reminder, quarterly compliance review. Perfect timing. I'd volunteered to help with year-end reconciliations 3 months ago, partly out of genuine interest and partly because it gave me access to departments I'd never seen before. The compliance office was 2 floors up, in a sterile wing where numbers lived and died by decimal points. "Good morning, Sarah," Janet from compliance greeted. "Ready to dive into the fun?" Janet was being sarcastic. Compliance work was famously boring, endless spreadsheets, receipt matching, and expense report verification. Most people avoided it, but I'd always found the patterns soothing, the numbers reassuring in their honesty. Unlike people, numbers didn't lie unless someone made them lie. The first stack of files contained routine expenses, hotel receipts, client dinners, conference fees, standard business costs that painted predictable pictures of professional life. But Dylan's file felt different from the moment I opened it. The first anomaly immediately jumped out, a dinner receipt from Bernardine in New York. 00 for 2 people. Expensive, but not unusual for client entertaining. Except the date was September 15th, and Dylan's travel calendar showed him in Los Angeles that entire week. I checked his submitted timesheets. No travel authorization for New York, no client meeting scheduled. I mentally flagged it and read on. Another restaurant receipt, this time from Chicago. Again, no corresponding travel record. Then a hotel bill from Seattle for a week in which he charged hours for being in the San Francisco office. Finding something interesting, Janet asked, looking over my shoulder. Just the usual discrepancies. I replied casually. Some travel receipts that don't match the timesheets, probably just filing errors, but they weren't filing errors. As I dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Dylan was submitting legitimate receipts, but they weren't his. The signatures on the credit card slips belonged to different people. The dates and locations never matched his actual hours. Someone was providing him with these receipts, and he was claiming them as business expenses. My phone buzzed with a text from Grant. "We're eating today. I want to talk about last night." I ignored it. Last night's humiliation felt secondary now to what I was uncovering in these files. Dylan wasn't just incompetent, he was actively defrauding the company. And if Nicole already knew something, these spending irregularities could be the tip of a much larger iceberg. The second red flag appeared in her vendor payments. Dylan had approval authority for purchases under the standard $5,000 for junior analysts, but his approved vendors included companies I'd never heard of. Pacific Consulting Solutions, West Coast Analytics Group, Mountain View Strategic Services. All the listed addresses led to P.O. boxes and virtual offices. I pulled up the invoices. The work descriptions were vague: strategic market analysis, competitive research deliverables, client retention consulting. But the billing patterns were identical. Same invoice templates. Same payment terms, same grammatical errors in the service descriptions. "Janet," I called her. "Can you show me how to access the vendor registration information?" "Sure, though most of that is handled automatically through our procurement system." She opened the database and searched for Pacific Consulting Solutions, incorporated 6 months ago, a one-employee company. The address matched a strip mall in San Jose. The record listed Dylan's personal email as the primary contact. My pulse quickened. Dylan wasn't just filing fake expenses, he was creating shell companies and paying himself for services that didn't exist. The amounts were small enough to avoid triggering automatic audits. But over time, they added up to a significant amount of money. A shadow fell across my desk. I looked up to find PI's own Dylan. Coffee in hand and wearing that easy smile that had gotten him into this position. "Hi," he said, his voice carrying that casual confidence that comes from never having to worry about consequences. "I heard you got promoted. Pretty impressive for someone who started in customer service." The hint was subtle, but unmistakable. He knew my track record. He knew I'd worked my way up from the bottom, unlike him with his supposedly prestigious title and family connections. "Thank you," I replied evenly. "Just trying to make sure everything runs smoothly." Speaking of which, I've been reviewing some expense reports for compliance. Do you mind if I ask about this dinner receipt from Le Bernardin? I held the paper, watching his face intently. For an instant, his confident mask cracked. His eyes flicked down to the receipt, then back up to my face, calculating. "Ah, that old thing. Client dinner with the Peterson account. I must have mixed up my travel dates in the system. The Peterson account is based in Portland, I said quietly. This receipt is from New York. Dylan's laugh was too loud for the office environment in the morning. You know how crazy travel is. Sometimes I'm juggling so many cities I can barely keep track. I'll have my assistant update the records. I didn't have an assistant. Junior analysts never did, but I simply nodded and put the receipt back in its folder. Don't worry, I'm just trying to keep everything organized. After he left, I noticed his hands had been shaking slightly. That polished trust was more fragile than I wanted people to believe. I spent my lunch break in my car creating a private folder on my personal cloud drive, screenshots of vendor records, photos of the suspicious receipts, and timestamps of discrepancies in Dylan's calendar. Each piece of evidence was small on its own, but together they painted a clear picture of systematic fraud. The discovery of the metadata was accidental. Dylan had emailed me a quarterly analysis report, accidentally including my address in a mass distribution. The file looked professional: graphs, charts, detailed market projections. But when I opened the document properties, the original author was listed as someone named Jennifer Walls. The creation date was 3 years ago, last modified 2 days ago. I looked up Jennifer Walls in our company directory. Former employee, left 18 months ago. Senior analyst who had worked in competitive intelligence. I pulled his old reports from the filing system and found the original document identical to the one Dylan had just presented as his own work. He wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing ideas, research, and entire reports from former colleagues. The scope of his deception was breathtaking. That night, I sat in my apartment with all the evidence spread out on my dining room table: receipts, screenshots, metadata records, vendor records, a complete picture of a fraud that had been happening right under everyone's nose for nearly a year. I could have reported it immediately, called HR, sent everything to compliance, exposed Dylan before he could do any more damage. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was the memory of Stephanie's voice saying they'd lowered the standards. Perhaps it was Hal's insinuation that I hadn't earned my promotion. Or perhaps it was the realization that this wasn't just about Dylan anymore. This was about every person who had ever assumed I didn't belong. Who dismissed my accomplishments, who made me feel like an imposter in my own success. I closed the laptop and locked the evidence away. Not yet. When I revealed what Dylan had been doing, it would be at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way. Nicole's comment had shown me that the perfect opportunity was about to arrive. I just had to be patient and keep observing. 2 weeks later, I was still carrying Dylan's secrets like stones in my chest. The evidence was locked away in my personnel files, but its weight followed me everywhere. To the early morning meetings where I presented stolen research, to the lunch breaks where I charmed senior staff with borrowed ideas, to the late-night commutes home where I went over every fraudulent detail. Grant noticed my distraction during dinner on a rainy Thursday night. We'd ordered Thai takeout, and I was mechanically moving the pad around on my plate while my mind wandered between supplier records and falsified receipts. "You've been quiet lately," he said, refilling his beer from the bottle we kept in the fridge. "Everything okay at work?" The question felt loaded. Grant rarely asked about my work beyond superficial pleasantries. His sudden interest made my shoulders tense. "Just busy with the new role," I answered, taking a careful bite, learning the systems, understanding the scope of the responsibility. "Right, your promotion." He said it as if he was still processing the information. "Dylan mentioned he barely sees you around the office. Says you've been spending time with compliance." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Dylan had noticed my research. Worse, I'd mentioned it to Grant. The web of familial connections was tighter than I'd imagined. Compliance work is part of regional oversight, I said equably. Making sure everything runs smoothly across all departments. Grant nodded, but something changed in his expression. Dylan's doing very well there. His supervisor mentioned he might be up for another promotion soon. The guy has natural talent. Natural talent. The same phrase Stephanie and Hallie had used at dinner. I wondered if Grant truly believed it or if he was repeating familiar talking points. How did Dylan get the job? By the way, I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. It's a very competitive company. He was lucky to land something right out of grad school. Grant's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Family connections. It's normal in business. He's smart enough to handle it. But how exactly did the connection work? Stephanie knew someone. You interceded. Why are you asking so many questions? Grant's voice held an edge I rarely heard. Dylan earned his position. He had excellent references, strong academic performance. The family connection alone helped him get noticed. The defensiveness in his tone set off alarm bells. Grant was hiding something, and his discomfort was making him sloppy. I'm just curious about the process, I prodded gently. Perhaps I can help others in my network understand how to leverage connections effectively. Leave it alone. Grant's words came out sharper than she'd intended. Don't go digging into family matters. Dylan's doing well, and that's all that matters. The warning was clear, but it also confirmed my suspicions. Grant knew more about Dylan's hiring than he was letting on. After dinner, while he watched TV, I retreated to our home office under the guise of catching up on work emails. Our shared computer sat in the corner, an antique desktop we used mostly for printing documents and storing photos. Grant handled most of our household administration from this machine: invoices, insurance forms, tax documents. If I'd helped Dylan with anything work-related, the traces would be here. I opened the printer history, expecting to find the usual mix of utility bills and bank statements. Instead, I found something that made my blood run cold. 3 PDFs printed 2 weeks ago. The timestamps showed 11:47 p.m., 11:52 p.m., and 11:55 p.m., late enough that Grant thought I was asleep. The file names were clinical. Reference 1 PDF, Reference 2 PDF, and Recommendation B Anderson PDF. My hands shook as I opened the first document. A glowing reference letter for Dylan Richardson, praising his analytical skills and work ethic during his internship at Thomson Strategic Consulting. The letterhead looked professional, the language was convincing, and the bylines seemed authentic, except Thomson Strategic Consulting didn't exist. I'd seen the name on Dylan's expense reports, one of the shell companies he'd set up to funnel money to himself. Now I understood the full extent of the deception. Dylan hadn't just stolen from Richardson Industries after being hired, he'd lied to get the position using fake references. The second letter was even more audacious. A recommendation from Douglas Morrison, supposedly Dylan's supervisor during a summer internship at Morrison Financial Group. The letter detailed specific projects Dylan had completed, clients he'd impressed, and the leadership potential he had demonstrated. But Douglas Morrison had retired 5 years earlier, and Morrison Financial Group had been acquired by a larger firm 3 years before Dylan's alleged practices. The third document was the most personal betrayal, a reference from Jennifer Henderson, praising Dylan's research skills and attention to detail during her work as a graduate research assistant. Jennifer Henderson was real. She was a former colleague of Grant's from his brief stint in academia before switching to sales, but she had never worked with Dylan, had never supervised students, and according to her LinkedIn profile, had been working abroad during the period mentioned in the letter. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. Grant hadn't just helped Dylan fabricate references, he'd involved his own professional contacts in the deception. He'd forged Jennifer's signature, stolen her credentials, and used her reputation to endorse lies. The worst part was the technical sophistication. These weren't crude forgeries. The letterheads were pixel perfect. The formatting was professional, and the language matched the style of communication from each supposed organization. Grant had invested a lot of time and effort into this deception. I printed fresh copies of all 3 documents. Then I reviewed his browser history. Grant had visited multiple websites. Logo galleries for design inspiration, academic writing guides for proper recommendation language, even tutorials on PDF editing software. He had researched this project like a graduate thesis. A noise from the living room made me close my browser quickly. Grant was getting up to get another beer, and I didn't want him to walk in on me at the computer. I stuffed the printed references into a binder and returned to the couch, my mind racing with the implications. "Everything okay?" Grant asked, settling back into his recliner. "Just checking emails," I answered, forcing my voice to sound normal. "You know how it is with the new position. There's always something that needs attention." He nodded, but I caught him glancing toward the office door. "You should probably start setting boundaries. You don't want work to take over your entire life." The irony was staggering. Grant was lecturing me on professional ethics while I'd spent weeks crafting fraudulent documents to advance Dylan's career. The same man who'd never offered to help me with my own job search, who discouraged me from applying for competitive positions because he thought I'd be disappointed. He'd moved heaven and earth to get his cousin an undeserved opportunity. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Grant slept peacefully beside me. 3 years of marriage, and I was discovering I'd never really known him. I wasn't just passively supporting Dylan's lies, I was actively orchestrating them. The next morning, I scanned all 3 reference letters and uploaded them to my secure cloud drive. Then I cleared the printer history. I deleted the browser cache and removed any trace of my discovery. If Grant checked the computer later, he wouldn't find anything suspicious. But I kept thinking about Jennifer Henderson. Grant had dragged an innocent person into this mess, using her name and reputation without permission. That crossed a line beyond familial loyalty towards something darker. I found Jennifer's contact information through Grant's old work files and sent him a carefully written email by asking if he had recently provided any reference for candidates for a job. His answer came in a matter of hours. He had not written a recommendation letter in more than 2 years and certainly had not heard of Dylan Richardson. Confirmation was felt as the final piece of a puzzle fitting instead. Now he had fraud, falsification, and identity trials. More importantly, I had evidence that directly linked to my own husband. I created a new email account with a generic name and wrote a message for Nicole Richardson. The matter was simple. Application for review of the audit committee documents. I attached the 3 falsified reference cards along with screenshots of their metadata that showed that they had recently been created despite their alleged dates. The message itself was brief. These documents were used in a recent hiring decision. Metadata and digital firms deserve a more detailed exam, particularly given the IP addresses of origin and the current work state of the alleged authors. I sent the email from a cafeteria to the other side of the city using its public Wi-Fi network to ensure that no digital trace will take me back. Then I eliminated the account and went home to wait. Justice was not only on its way, it was already moving. 3 days after I sent that anonymous email, the annual gala invitation of Richardson Industries leadership recognition arrived. My name was printed in an elegant calligraphy under regional directors to be honored. The thick cardboard felt substantial in my hands. An official proof that my ascent was not just an exercise to fill quotas of diversity like Stephanie had hinted. Grant found the invitation at the counter of our kitchen and picked it up with the type of reluctance that people reserve for jury notifications. "These things are just to appear," he murmured, leaving her again without reading the details. A lot of executives giving palmaditas on their backs while everyone pretends to care about corporate achievements. His disdain hurt more than it should. It was the first time in my career that honored me in an event of the entire company. The first time my professional achievements deserved formal recognition. I had imagined Grant proud. Perhaps even excited to see me receive recognition for years of hard work. "It is important for me," I said quietly. "I would like you to come." He sighed and took his cup of coffee. "Okay, but I'm not going to put a smoking to see people give speeches about synergy and market penetration." The night of the gala chose my blue navy dress carefully. It was the same that Stephanie had criticized at a family wedding 2 years ago, calling him too much business for a party and suggesting that he needed to learn the difference between the clothing of the boardroom and social events. That night he felt like armor. The Baylor's dance hall was decorated with the corporate colors of Richardson Industries. Deep blue and silver that captured the light of the candlesticks. Round tables filled the space, each covered with white tablecloths and centered with discreet floral arrangements. The honoree employees sat at the front tables while the relatives and other guests filled the rear half of the room. I saw Stephanie and Hal immediately. They had occupied a table near the bar, strategically positioned to observe the entire room while maintaining easy access to cocktails. Both had designer dresses that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and both had already begun their comments on the fashion elections of other guests. "There is Dylan's family," Grant said, greeting in his direction. "We should go to greet." He was still reluctant, knowing that this meeting was inevitable, but fearing family dynamics. Stephanie greeted Grant with kisses in the air and gave me a courteous assent that felt more like the recognition of an obligation did not want. "Wow, look at those who pay tribute tonight," Jay said, his voice with that malicious sweetness that always preceded something cruel. "You already have your little back, huh? Regional director, it sounds so official." The way he said "cagidecito" made it clear that I considered my insignificant assent. I forced a smile and thanked him, refusing to let it decrease this moment. "Do you know?" Stephanie added, accommodating in her chair with the grace of someone accustomed to attracting attention. "Some of us prefer to raise true leaders instead of pursuing corporate titles. Like Dylan. That boy has a natural executive presence. Born for leadership." I bit my tongue with such force that I felt copper flavor. Dylan was supposed to be at the gala. Junior analysts were invited to these events, but their chair remained empty. A small part of me wondered if my anonymous breath had already reached the right people. On the other side of the room I looked with Nicole Richardson. She was sitting at the main table with other executives and her spouses, elegant in a way that she didn't need to announce. He gave me a subtle assent of recognition, and something in his expression suggested that he remembered our brief interaction in that disastrous family dinner. The evening passed with the standard routine of a corporate event: welcome cocktails, dinner service, and speeches of several department leaders on quarterly achievements and strategic initiatives. I found myself relaxing while my colleagues congratulated me for the ascent, sharing stories about the challenges they had overcome and the goals that had been set for next year. "The growth figures of your department are impressive," said Robert Chin of the marketing division. 30% increase in customer retention, 45% income growth. That is the type of performance that is noted at the executive level. Validation was genuine, based on measurable results instead of family connections or perceived quotas. For the first time in weeks I remembered why I had fought so much for this position, but peace did not last long. While retiring the dishes and the dessert arrived, Stephanie's voice was heard at our table. "It is a pity that Dylan has not been able to come tonight," he announced to anyone in particular. He had an urgent matter with a client that required his attention. That is the brand of a dedicated professional: put the needs of the client over personal recognition. G nodded with approval. Unlike some people who prioritize their own progress on real results, the PUA was clearly aimed at me, suggesting that my presence in the gala represented a selfish ambition instead of a deserved recognition. Great moved uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing to defend me. His silence had become a constant backdrop in these family interactions. The main speaker was finishing his comments on innovation and leadership when Nicole Richardson got up. The room gradually silenced as people noticed that the wife of the executive director approached the podium. He was not scheduled to speak, but his presence imposed immediate attention. "Before concluding the celebration tonight," Nicole began, her clear voice through the sound system, "I need to address something important that has recently reached our attention." A murmur toured the crowd. This was not part of the planned program. And the change in Nicole's tone suggested a serious matter in a place of congratulations. "The success of our company depends on integrity. Transparency and progress based on the merit of qualified professionals." Continued, their eyes touring the room before perching at our table. "Unfortunately, we have discovered evidence of fraudulent credentials and misrepresented qualifications within our organization." The temperature in the room seemed to lower several degrees. The Stephanie wine cup froze halfway to his lips and Jolly's confident smile blinked like a candle in the wind. Nicole placed a manila folder on the podium. The deliberate and ominous gesture. Falsified reference letters, manufactured work experience, and misrepresented educational achievements. These violations of trust and professional ethics will be thoroughly investigated from Monday morning. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle at the audience. The individual in question has been suspended pending a complete internal review. We will also examine how these fraudulent materials were created and who could have helped in their preparation. My heart was so strong that I was sure that everyone could hear it. This was my anonymous breath paying fruit, but listening to it publicly announced that the consequences were suddenly feeling real and irreversible. Stephanie's face had become completely pale, the color disappearing so quickly that she seemed sick. His hands trembled while leaving his cup and saw her look frantically towards the exit doors. "The integrity of our hiring process is essential," Nicole continued. "We owe it to our legitimate employees, those who have earned their positions through hard work, education, and genuine qualifications, to ensure that fraudulent actors cannot undermine our standards." The word legitimate hit as a physical blow to Stephanie and Hallie. All their comments on quotas and high standards were returning against them, revealing that the true threat to the integrity of the company came from its own family. That may have participated in the creation of false documents. Outputs before usual. While we expected the ballot to bring our car, Grant finally broke the silence that had surrounded us since Nicole's speech. "You did this, right?" His voice was just a whisper. But the accusation was unmistakable. I turned to the brilliant windows of the hotel, seeing the city's lights to pass blurred next to taxis and luxury cars. He should not an explanation. He had made his decision when he decided to help Dylan falsify those reference letters, when he prioritized family loyalty about professional ethics, when he remained silent for years before the derogatory comments of his relatives about my achievements. I simply made sure that the truth came to light. I finally said, "You made your decision." I made the most high and clear. The ballot brought our car and conducted home in complete silence. But for the first time in our marriage, silence felt like a victory instead of a defeat. On Monday morning he arrived as a storm that had been observing approaching for weeks. I dressed carefully for work, choosing a cool blazer that projected confidence without seeking celebratory. Upon entering Richardson Industries, I was able to feel the change in the atmosphere immediately, whispered conversations that stopped when it passed, curious looks of colleagues who had heard rumors, but did not know the details. Dylan's corner office was empty. The monitor of his dark computer, his standing desk, clear of everything, except a lonely cup of coffee with the company's logo. The safety card scanner would have rejected its credentials at 6 in the morning. Nicole's research moved with the efficiency of a well-greased machine. "I've heard the suspension," Marcus said in a low voice while we waited for the elevator. Compliance was here before 7 in the morning. Packaging files of his workspace. He must serious. I nodded without compromising, without trusting myself to comment. The elevator's doors opened and climbed to the 5th floor in a thoughtful silence. My phone rang before I had even reached my desk. Grant's call tone, a simple bell that had never bothered me to customize. "They have suspended the air." "Dylan," he said without preamble. His tense voice for stress. "Stephanie has been calling me from 6 in the morning. Do you want to know what is happening?" "I imagine yes," I responded by accommodating myself in my chair and lighting my computer. "This is serious. They are talking about a complete investigation. Internal audit, review of human resources, the whole matter." The breath of great sound to another. Years dismissing the achievements of other people such as filling of quotas and reduction of standards, now he claimed that his nephew was a victim of labor policy. "Maybe they found something worth investigating," I said carefully. "You don't understand. If they fit deep enough, you will find." Grant stopped, but the admission was floating in the air between us. "They will find that, Grant." Silence lasted for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was just a whisper. I helped him with some of the application materials. Just a little help with format and language. Nothing important. The lie was so transparent that it was almost insulting. Help with format and language, did not need to create ghost companies or falsify references of retired professionals. But Great still tried to minimize its involvement, even for itself. "I need to get to work," I said. "I am sure that Dylan will solve everything if there has been a misunderstanding." I hung before I could answer my firm hands despite the adrenaline that ran through my system. The morning passed in electronic email and customer calls, but I could feel the research machinery starting around me. Human resources representatives moved through the building with folders and laptops. Your presence creating speculation and concern waves. Around 11, my direct supervisor called on the wall of my cubicle. "Sarah, Nicole Richardson would like to see you in the executive conferences room. Now if possible." My stomach shrunk even though I had been waiting for this conversation. I followed him through halls that he rarely traveled, through offices with mahogany furniture and roof-floor windows that offered panoramic views of the city. Nicole was sitting alone at the head of a glass conference table with a stack of documents extended before her. He made me a gesture to take a seat, his illegible expression. "Thank you for coming," his voice began with the same authority that had commanded the audience of the gala. "I wanted to discuss the recent events related to the use of Dylan Richardson." I waited, maintaining my neutral expression. "Our research has discovered an extensive fraud," Nicole continued. "Manufactured educational credentials, falsified reference letters, and stolen intellectual property. The scope is actually noticeable." It opened a folder and took out a family document, one of Dylan's false reference letters. This particular letter claims to be from Douglas Morrison in Morrison Financial Group, but Morrison retired 5 years and the company before the supposed dates of the practices. Contact with Grant Richardson later today to discuss their involvement in the creation of these fraudulent materials. The careful lies and the desperate deviation of Grant could not protect him from digital evidence and traces of metadata. "I appreciate that I keep informed," I said. My strongest voice than I felt. Nicole reclined in his chair, his expression softening slightly. "I also wanted to thank you for getting our attention on this matter." The anonymous breath we received was exhaustive and presented professionally. I kept my face carefully blank, without confirming or denying my involvement. "A fraud like this damages all who legitimately win their post," Nicole continued. "Confidence undermined, creates unfair advantages, ultimately, harms people who follow the rules." His words felt like a validation that I had not realized that I needed. 4 months. I had questioned whether to expose Dylan was the right choice. If I was acting for petty jealousy or by a genuine principle. Nicole's evaluation confirmed what he had known all the time. This was not personal grievances, it was about protecting integrity that made the achievement significant. "Grant Richardson has been asked to give up his current position," Nicole said naturally. "The company for which it works takes very seriously the violations of ethics, especially when they imply the falsification of professional references." I nodded, absorbing information without surprise. The Grant employer had clearly been contacted as part of the growing scope of the investigation. "Thanks for the update," I said. "I probably should return to my apartment." "Of course, and Sarah," Nicole's voice had a warm note that I had not heard before. "Congratulations again for your ascent. It is very deserved." I returned to my desk with emotions found, relief that the truth final strident, full of accusation and panic. Jealousy disguised in righteousness. They reflected their own insecurities instead of any truth about my character or capacities. "I didn't do this for jealousy," I said, my firm and clear voice. "I did it because I won everything I have with honest work and legitimate qualifications, and I will not allow anyone to take that away from me or decrease what it means." Stephanie's silence lasted for several seconds before she hung without saying another word. Grant came home that night off and defeated. They had asked him to renounce his sales post with immediate effect. The investigation had revealed its role in the creation of counterfeit references, and its employer could not risk associating with documentary fraud. 3 years, he collapsed in his reclining chair. 3 years building relationships, fulfilling quotas, winning commissions, all lost because I tried to help the family. I did not answer. Grant had chosen to help Dylan, breaking every ethical rule he had once claimed to respect. The consequences were totally predictable and completely deserved. We spent the night in separate rooms. The weight of the accusations not said and the destroyed trust making it impossible conversation. Grant retired to his home office to make calls on compensation packages and unemployment benefits. While I prepared for another day of work where my ascent felt increasingly solid and legitimate. A week later I found a note at the kitchen counter next to the key of Grant's house. I can't stay here knowing that you destroyed my family's future. I will stay with my brother until finding out what to do next. I hope you are satisfied with what you have achieved. The note was simply signed, Grant, without the usual samples of affection that our correspondence had scored for 6 years. I stayed in the silent kitchen, holding the key that symbolized the end of my marriage, and waited for tears or repentance or the overwhelming sadness that should have accompanied such a moment. Instead, I felt nothing more than a deep peace. The next morning I went to work with my head high, walking through corridors that I finally felt that they belonged to me as much as any other person. 2 weeks spent a pace that had forgotten that it existed. Quiet mornings with coffee and news, pauses for lunch where no one questioned my choices. Nights where the only voice in my apartment was mine. I had begun to leave work at reasonable hours, without feeling guilty about the limits that had never been established. Nicole's email arrived on Tuesday. A coffee this week. I would like to discuss some opportunities. We are in a small cafeteria near the office. The type of place with brick walls seen and ancient furniture disappeared that felt deliberately without pretensions. Nicole came first, occupying a table next to the window where the afternoon sunlight was leaked through transparent curtains. "Thank you for making time," he said as I settled in the chair in front of her. "I know they have been a few weeks moved." That was to fall short. Dylan's dismissal had ended the previous Friday. Your access to the systems of the company permanently revoked. The investigation had discovered fraud for a total of almost $80,000 in false expenses and payments to ghost companies. Grant's role in the scheme of reference letters, it had resulted in possible criminal charges, although his lawyer was negotiating a guilt agreement. "I have been watching how you have handled everything," Nicole continued, stirring honey in her tea. "The way you behave in difficult circumstances. There is a quiet force that is rare in corporate environments." I drank my beet without knowing how to respond to such a direct praise. The fulfillment felt strange after years of subtle criticism and conditional recognition. "You not only protected your own position," Nicole said. "You protected the integrity of our entire hiring process." Companies live or die from the confidence of customers, investors, of employees who need to believe that merit still matters. He put his hand in his briefcase and pulled out a cream-colored envelope with my name written in elegant calligraphy. "The board met yesterday," Nicole said, sliding the envelope for the small table. "We would like to offer you a new position." My hands trembled slightly while opening the envelope. The letterhead was in relief. The language was formal and official. Senior Strategic Analyst reporting directly to the Office of the Executive Director. A 30% salary increase. Participation in capital and supervision of interdepartmental initiatives. "This is not a reward for exposing Dylan," Nicole clarified, reading my expression. "It is a recognition of how you handled a complex situation, without drama, without public accusations, only careful documentation and appropriate channels. That kind of judgment is exactly what we need in senior management." The offer felt surreal. 6 months ago I struggled for recognition as regional director. Now they asked me to join the executive leadership team, to help shape the company's strategy instead of simply implementing it. "I understand if you need time to consider it," Nicole said. It is a significant step in responsibility. I don't need time, I responded, surprising myself with certainty in my voice. I accept. Nicole smiled. The first genuinely warm expression he had seen. Excellent. You start on Monday. We will have your new office ready by then. The apartment search began that weekend. He had been living in the house of grade of our marriage, a suburban colonial house that reflected his tastes more than mine. The rooms were too large, the colors too neutral, all the space designed to entertain people who no longer wanted to see. I found my new place on the third search day. A loft of a bedroom in a warehouse converted in the center. Brick walls seen, original wood soils and windows that extended from the ground to the roof. The rent was higher than I had never paid before, but my new salary made it comfortable instead of stress. The real estate agent warned. As if I hadn't noticed. It is perfect. I responded, already imagining how the morning light would fill the space. The day of the move was surprisingly emotional. I packed only what really belonged to me: clothes, books, some furniture I had bought before marriage. Everything else was left behind. Symbols of a life that had never felt completely authentic. The most difficult decision was that of the wedding photos. I found them in a box in our bedroom closet. Images of a woman who looked like me, but seemed strange. He smiled in each photo, but the joy seemed forced, acted for the cameras and families that had never fully accepted their presence. I left them in the box and closed the closet door. My sister Rachel came from San Diego to help with the move. The first time we spent more than a phone call together in 3 years. Grant had always found excuses to avoid his visits, stating that his energy was too intense for his comfort. I like this place, Rachel said, leaving a kitchen utensils box in my new space. He feels like you. What do you mean? Honest, without pretensions, only clean lines and good light. He pointed to the windows. Do you remember how you used to paint? You always said that you needed natural light for the accuracy of the color. I had forgotten that detail. One of the many parts of myself that had been lost during the marriage. Grant, covered with dust and abandonment, I had not told them about separation. Immediate. You sound different. I'm going to divorce, I simply said. And they rose to senior management and moved to my own apartment in the center. The silence lasted enough to check if the call had not been cut. There are many changes, my father said finally. Are you sure you're making the right decisions? For the first time in months I laughed out. Dad, I've never been safer in my life. The conversation lasted 2 hours, full of questions that I had been preparing to answer and support that I did not expect to receive. I had never fallen especially well, Grant. I learned. But they had maintained their opinions in respect for my decisions. He always seemed to think that I was doing a favor when my mother said, "Thus healthy relationships do not work." On Monday morning he arrived with the clear energy of the new beginnings. My corner office on the executive floor had windows that gave both east and south, flooding the space with a light that reminded me of my new apartment. A plaque at the door said, Sarah Macias, Senior Strategic Analyst, in Tom letters that captured the lighting of the hall. Nicole called the frame of my door around 10, carrying 2 cups of coffee. How was the first day? He asked, accommodating in one of my new chairs. How to return home, I answered, and said it with total sincerity. The work was challenging in ways that felt energizing rather than exhausting: strategic planning, interdepartmental coordination, and executive reports requiring the kind of analytical thinking I'd always enjoyed. For the first time in my career, I felt like my abilities were being fully utilized rather than carefully contained. Painting began slowly on weekend afternoons, when the natural light filled my apartment and the silence allowed for a concentration I'd forgotten was possible. Watercolor landscapes at first, then abstract pieces that sprang from instinct rather than planning. My hands recalled skills I thought I'd lost. Muscle memory returning like a dormant language suddenly spoken again. Dylan's criminal charges were finalized 3 months later: fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. His plea deal included restitution payments and community service, but no jail time. Stephanie sent a letter to my office blaming me for destroying her nephew's future and demanding that I contact the district attorney to minimize the charges. I threw the letter away without responding. Grant's situation was resolved more quietly. His plea deal included probation and a fine, along with a permanent notch on his professional record that would make future sales employment nearly impossible. He had moved back in with his brother and taken a job at a hardware store. His corporate career was effectively over. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, no vindictive pleasure in its consequences. He had made decisions that inevitably led to specific outcomes. I had simply stopped protecting him from the natural results of his decisions. The final vindication came 6 months later. During the Richardson Industries annual board meeting, Nicole introduced me as one of 3 senior analysts whose strategic recommendations had increased the company's efficiency by 12% and customer satisfaction scores by 18%. These are the results we see when we prioritize merit-based advancement and ethical leadership, she told the assembled executives. Talent rises to its appropriate level when given a genuine opportunity. Sitting in that boardroom, surrounded by people who respected my opinions and valued my contributions, I realized that my rise had never been the real victory. The victory was becoming someone who didn't need external validation to know her own worth, someone who could stand up for her principles without apology. Someone who had finally stopped living her life on other people's terms. I had learned that the quietest, most permanent kind of justice wasn't punishment. It was simply allowing the truth to exist without interference. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop protecting people from the consequences of their own choices and start protecting yourself from their attempts to diminish yours. In the end, I hadn't destroyed anyone, I just finally stopped destroying myself. If this story of quiet justice made you root for Sarah, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Nicole stood up at the gala, knowing exactly the bombshell she was about to drop. What was your favorite moment? Leave it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any posts.